So it seems that Games Workshop has come out with some pretty massive changes to Index Chaos Daemons, lots of updated rules, stat lines and points costs, plus a brand new detachment for them. Let's talk about the changes, what they might mean, and go through what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Daemons, and in this video I thought we'd go through Games Workshop's latest updates for the direct manifestations of the Ruinous Powers. In the big Spring 2025 balance update, there's been really quite a lot of changes to Warhammer 40k, lots of changes to a whole bunch of factions in the game, but certainly the single most effective one were the Chaos Daemons, where it seems that as well as a general balance update with some buffs and nerfs and things, they've also got what essentially seems to amount to a digital codex update. Now between the digital contents for them, they've got 6 different detachments, one for each deity and 2 undivided ones, a whole bunch of rules and points updates for their individual datasheets, and a few other changes. I feel like getting such a change for Codex Chaos Daemons maybe isn't the most reassuring thing for the faction in the long run. For quite a while now, people have had the general sense that Chaos Daemons might well not be getting a Codex in 10th edition, between some rumours and hints like the Grotmus detachments. Games Workshop still haven't really 100% confirmed either way, but basically stated that Index Chaos Daemons would remain a digitally updated document in the same way as Deathwatch. And that does seem to further imply that they're not getting a proper codex for 10th edition. I guess on the one hand it's kind of good news that you basically get the rules but you don't have to pay for them this time around, but maybe the bigger concern is what happens to the faction come 11th edition, where it feels like if they're going through a patch of rough support, that might be a prelude to something more dramatic like the faction being properly reinterpreted and split out into deity codexes, or a lot of datasheets going to legends or something. We just don't know at this point. Hard to know what Games Workshop intends. In any case though, for this update the contents are several altered unit profiles. Most of the Slaanesh ones fairly closely match the Emperor's Children, but not all of them are one for one. I'd guess that the other updated profiles will be ones that match the ones in their deity codexes. We've had some surprise plastic datasheets lost, including Khorne and the Seeker Chariots for Slaanesh, a new detachment in Bellacor's Shadow Legion, and then some updated points costs and some nerfed rules for the Legions of Excess, along with the balance data slate. Hard to know exactly what comes with balance changes and what is more part of this big update. My guess is that this probably isn't the last that we'll see of updates to Chaos Daemons. I think that we'll probably see another wave of changes to the document happen after the deity codexes come out, in particular for removed units and allied rules at the very least, and there might be further changes beyond that. I'll talk about why in the first couple of sections of the video. In any case though, let's talk about the removed units and the Daemonic Pact first, then go through the changes to the 4 deities in turn, then undivided things, and then talk briefly about the detachments in the document. First up, let's start with the removed units, and the ones that got sent to Legends were Khorne and the various Seeker Chariot variants. These were kind of a surprise. These Seeker Chariots are maybe an older kit that seem a little bit more tailored towards fantasy settings than 40k. Khorne on the other hand was a real surprise. He's had at least a fairly recent model, and has even been sold in discount box sets. I believe that he was in the boarding patrol for demons. Not exactly great news for anyone who had the models. Some people commented in the previous video that they'd bought one or more of them recently. Really not a great feeling when Games Workshop just turns around and sends things that people might have worked hard on and spent good money on and puts them into Legends and doesn't support them properly. It's not that you can't use them in casual games, but it likely does come with a downgrading of support and not being quite as well realised in the future. As mentioned, I feel like we haven't seen the last of model removals from Index Chaos Daemons. Throughout 10th edition, a big theme has been a lot of Finecast stuff going to Legends, and Demons still have a lot of stuff there. There's Epidemius, the Blue Scribes, the Transweaver, the Herald on Disc, and the Juggernaut Herald, I think, all in resin. And I'd be kind of surprised if these are still there after they do the update with all the deity codexes. As for many of these, they no longer sell the model for them. I guess it remains to be seen if they're done with the model removals for other things similar to Khorne and the Seeker Chariots. Maybe we might get another wave of those removed. It's really hard to say what they'll do in the future with demons at this stage. Otherwise, another core rule that I was interested to see if they'd update or not is Daemonic Pact. This is the one for fielding allied demons alongside your forces, and it looks like this one's unchanged for now, but again it's something that I'd strongly suspect would probably be changing once the deity books are out. For now it still looks like any Chaos army can basically take a quarter of their force in allied demon datasheets, though given that they're putting demon datasheets in the deity codexes, my guess is that they'll be the only ones that those books can access, and maybe the question remains what will happen to Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Knights beyond that. Hopefully they'll still be able to ally demons as before. Rules like this have definitely been getting a lot more restrictive as 10th edition has gone on though. In any case, this rule definitely will need a rewrite, and this won't be the final updated version of it, as it still references your warlord being Lucius the Eternal, which is very much the index rules for Emperor's Children and not the codex ones. Moving into the deity units, and I'll focus on the main changes that have happened, starting with Khorne. Scarbrand was one of the data sheets that got the most rewrites, the big scary bloodthirster with tattered wings. For the most part, he's had a fairly good amount of buffs, staying the same amount of points, but going up to a 10-inch move. His Bellow of Endless Fury is a lot more dangerous, with 2d6 attacks at Strength 8, AP -1. Previously it was only Strength 5, AP 0. He's gained a 3+ save, which he didn't have before. A few of the greater demons have gained that. He can now advance and charge at base without relying on stratagems or anything for that, so that's kind of handy there. And the +1 attack aura that he has for Khorne things allows him to affect himself with that and any other monsters and vehicles that are Khornate, so I guess that's an improvement on his own melee stat line there as well. Finally, he's even gained an improvement on his sweep melee profile as well for Slaughter and Carnage. The only trade-off for all that is that he's lost his no fallback aura, with a chance to make enemies remain stationary. That one's definitely a pretty major rules loss, but on the whole I feel like he's gained quite a lot just from his overall stat buffs, and advance and charge being built in is rather nice. Seems a pretty intimidating datasheet overall. Otherwise, for the other Khorne stuff, the Bloodthirster gained a 3+ save as well, the Lash of Khorne gains a little bit of extra AP, and it seems that they tweaked the profile on the Axe of Khorne's strike. It's now D3+1 damage as opposed to D6. I guess that would make it a bit more reliable at killing things like standard Space Marines, as you'd always have damage too. I suspect that most people would just be tempted to stick with the Great Axe of Khorne though. In general though, he's not really changed all that much. Bloodletters also seem to have a bit of a side grade. Their movement's boosted to a very Khornate 8. So that means that they're now really quite fast moving infantry to move across the board and then hit things hard with those Hellblades, though they have lost really quite a powerful inbuilt damage rule that they had, re-rolling wound rolls with 1s to wound and then 4 re-rolls against things on objectives. Instead of that, they now have a desperate escape rule. They force desperate escape checks on things falling back from them, everything besides monsters and vehicles, and if stuff was already battle shocked, it's a -1 to the test. This is maybe a bit disappointing that they won't be hitting things quite as hard as they did previously, maybe a bit more reliant on buffs like the new Bellicord attachments, Lance and extra AP one that they can get there. I'd say the Desperate Escape rule is a bit worse than that though. It's alright for a bit of utility, but your opponent can always choose the best thing for them, either staying in melee or taking the hit of a few casualties. The 8-inch move is quite a nice upgrade though, and their attached characters also gain that as well. Otherwise, for the more major Khorne changes, the Fleshhounds gained a Return to Reserve style special rule. They also went up to 75 points from 70, so paying for that a little bit there, but now it looks like as well as being a fastish, medium tough skirmish unit that can handle 1 wound infantry, they can also bounce on and off the board, potentially doing secondary objectives, which could be handy enough. As usual, they can go back to reserve at the end of the enemy turn if they're outside of engagement range, and they swapped out their Heroic Intervention rule for free, which wasn't really the most impactful one in the first place in my opinion. I feel like overall they came off fairly well. Otherwise, for the other Khorne datasheets, there weren't too many changes. The other biggish one was 2 Blood Crushers that gained a 3+ save, as do attached characters to them, but at the same time their invulnerable save was downgraded from a 4+ to a 5+, so that means that they'll be a little bit more durable against small arms fire, but a bit less so against things like heavy weapon fire, which I feel like they probably had to fear special weapons and heavy weapons a bit more otherwise. Overall seems like some side grades. Faster Blood Collectors seem nice. Scarbrand overall seems to have improved, and I feel like Return to Reserve for Fleshhounds is worth the 5 points. The Bloodletter change definitely came at the expense of some big damage though. Before we move on to the other Chaos Deities, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Weyland Yutani Terrain. They're one option to get a board worth of Warhammer terrain on the table. They're basically the ones that supply the WTC, pretty much the biggest and most well-known team tournament around. These guys' main focus is making functional competitive terrain that works really well from a gameplay perspective, so they've got their lightweight ruins that you can disassemble, and quite clear terrain footprints and things that don't block the way of models at all. Their terrain's made of fairly sturdy plastic. You can get a bunch of different designs on it, as you can see here. And then they've got a few different options for boards worth of terrain, around about $150, 140 euros or £120 or so. This WTC War Master Pack being a fairly good example with a bunch of big and small ruins. Otherwise, they've also got the current Pariah Nexus terrain pack, if you want the current competitive terrain set for the WTC. Plus they do sets of big ruins as well, if you just want a bit of line of sight blocking on the table. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description. If competitive terrain was something that you're in the market for, There's a discount code if you do pick up anything at all for 5% off with Auspex 5. In any case, thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Moving on to the other demon deities though, and perhaps ironically the least changed out of the datasheets are the Tzeentch ones. In general, the vast majority of these stayed pretty much as is. I guess we'd already had one datasheet change for the Screamers last time around in the previous balance update, where they gained their anti-keywords versus monsters and vehicles. It still seems that Tzeentch had a few bits of good news though. The Flamers dropping down to 65 points per 3 of them was a slightly unexpected, though quite a powerful change. They often tend to be a pretty useful datasheet for Codex Chaos Demons, as actually demons with a bit of fairly fierce close range shooting. Essentially for around 22 points per model, they're at least fairly threatening to lighter infantry and fairly tough as well. Really nice with the deep strike shenanigans that things like the Incursion can pull off. Screamers drop down a bit from 85 points to 80, nice and fast and fairly general purpose damage that's threatening against standard marines and tougher stuff with the anti-keywords. And otherwise for actual datasheet changes here there wasn't all that much. Kairos Fate Weaver now generates command points a bit better. He just farms 1 command point after passing a leadership test at the start of your command phase, rather than the slightly awkward battle round roll-off that you had to do previously. I think that this has slightly improved his datasheet, and the Fate Skimmer and the Burning Chariot both get the anti-4+ keywords on their Screamer bite attacks. Otherwise, horrors and things look like they're pretty well the same. I feel like targeting units of pink horrors and flamers will both really enjoy that -1 to hit from the Bellicord attachment, making them even more unpleasant to remove with their 4+ invulnerables and that. Nurgle next, and the big guys got some changes. Rottages and the Great Unclean One both went up to 250 points, though got different buffs on each of them. Rottages gained a 6+ Feel No Pain, so he's going to be a bit tankier and harder to take out than he was before. His damage with his Gnarl Rod got some small buffs, a +2 strength on his strike profile and a +1 on the sweep, and the Virulent Blessing that he can do to amp up the damage of other Nurgle units is a bit more long and ranged, going to 24 inches. For the downside, he did have the points increase, and the Deluge attack is now a -2 to move rather than halving it, so did come with some trade-offs. He has been used from time to time as allied datasheets, including to things like Chaos Knight, a fairly powerful datasheet just on his own basis. Feels like that's a fairly reasonable trade-off given the points increase, doesn't really seem enormously stronger or weaker. The Great Unclean One got a similar points nerf, going up to 250. For the changes that he got, there were a few side grades. The Bile Sword is a fair bit punchier at strength 10 and damage d6 +1. He'll be a little bit less pillow-fisted into tough stuff now, and for the extra 20 points that isn't the worst upgrade in the world. He now gets the Feel No Pain type save that he has inbuilt, as he no longer has an aura of it. Instead he gives a +1 toughness aura for Nurgle demons, and that'll affect him as well. So that means that the Great Unclean One's typically going to be at a rather intimidating toughness 13 on the tabletop, a pretty big breakpoint for a whole bunch of things like las cannons. For the downsides, he did get the points increase, so he isn't quite as efficient there. He no longer has the Feel No Pain type aura that he has. It's +1 toughness for Nurgle demons now. Against some things that might be better, but for some things it won't be. He also got the nerf from Endless Gift from the Daemon Incursion as well. That one's now 45 points rather than 30. I still think for the 4+ Feel No Pain though, it's pretty well worth it if you want to include it. The overall Great Unclean One though is going to be just less than 300 points, so you are paying a bit more for that serious stack of toughness. I guess toughness 13 with a 4+ Feel No Pain still isn't going anywhere fast. Nurglings went down to 35 points or 60 for 6 of them, or 90 for 9. Kind of surprising to get a points decrease on them given that they're played in quite so many detachments. The points drop for them makes them even more efficient as nuisance, board control and speed bumps. And they do remain battle line as well, so if the Daemonic Pact rule does indeed remain unchanged for the Chaos Knights and the Chaos Space Marines going forward, then I'm sure they'll still be very popular there. Just having a few cheap infiltrators is really quite nice, and they can still do certain secondary objectives like engage on all fronts. Their damage debuff rule was nerfed a bit. They now just give a -1 to hit for units actually in engagement range for melee attacks. Previously it was a big 6-inch rule of -1 to hit for literally everything. To be honest, that was kind of crazy value on top of already being a pretty annoying to take down and cheap unit that can deep strike and infiltrate. I feel like particularly in the context of the points cut, they're still looking absolutely great and a very easy unit to include in basically any demon army or any chaos army that can take them in general. Otherwise for the Nurgle demons, the other change was to Beasts of Nurgle. They went up to OC3 and gained Scout 6 inches, seemingly without any points increase at all. That seems to just make them even better than they were previously, and they were already very solid. 65 points for a great big tough Nurgle demon that, if it's injured but not destroyed at the end of the phase, just casually regenerates to 4 wounds again. They were pretty popular when paired with maybe some Plague Bearers or Nurglings to unlock them via battle line. Quite nice, cheap and tough units to do things like secondaries and board control. Otherwise, for Nurgle units, the Plague Bearers are still pretty standout as a datasheet, often cropping up in Demon list or Allied lists with their sticky objectives and big OC and just general toughness. Finally, for the Slaanesh Demons, they're notable for having the Legion of Excess nerfed in a big way. This was the detachment that was basically having Slaanesh Demons be the single strongest army in Warhammer 40k for a bit, a big 66% win rate on their detachment, and taking down a massive amount of grand tournaments out there. The core rule previously was if you charged in and gave up the fights first, then you could reroll all hits and wounds. Now instead, it's reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1, going up to all hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 if you happen to be fighting in your Shadow of Chaos. The damage buff is still quite a good one, basically 36% extra damage if you didn't have any rerolls before, going up to 56% if you're hitting on a 3+ and you're in the Shadow of Chaos. It's still quite a lot. Still seems like it's going to be a really powerful rule against anything that doesn't hit too hard in close combat, though it's going to be a really painful trade-off and probably just not quite as worth it for a bunch of units that are fighting against things in melee. It's definitely far less impactful for things like Fiends, which have mid-strength and really like the full wound rerolls for devastating wounds and their just general damage profile. Otherwise, there were nerfs to Thieves of Pain. That's the bouncer damage stratagem, and it's got a lot more restricted, going down to 9 inches and a visible target rather than a 12-inch range and not, so you can't bounce damage to things that are basically out of line of sight, or at least out of line of sight of everything. It also doesn't work on vehicles anymore, so if you wounded soul grinders, they can't bounce a whole bunch of damage on their big tough profiles to much lower toughness demonettes and things. Finally, the overwhelming excess is now just a -1 to hit stratagem. In the shooting or fight phase, it no longer has the big chance of just denying shooting to the unit outright, but previously you couldn't use it in the fight phase, so it has had a little bit of a positive and negative trade there. Overall, the detachment is significantly less standout than it was before. The core damage buff is still a fairly good one though. I feel like it is still at the point where it's playable, but with the damage buff being far less than it was, it certainly feels like it's not going to be one of the very strongest detachments in 40k in general. With that context, let's talk about the Slaanesh Demon datasheets, and these largely mirror the changes in Codex Emperor's Children, though there are a few changes to things beyond that. Shalaxi Hellbane took a fairly big nerf. The Shining Aegis no longer gives her a 5+ feel no pain, it's a 3+ save now, the same for the Keeper of Secrets, and that's just far worse in terms of durability for the unit. Shalaxi's rerolls now only apply against one thing marked as a quarry at the start of the game. So it means that the opponent has a bit more counterplay of keeping that one unit away from her, as opposed to just getting mad rerolls against every single monster, vehicle and character. She's also got strength 12 on the main damage profile of her primary weapon too. Otherwise, Fiends had their datasheet rule changed. They now trigger desperate escape tests for units with engagement range of them, as opposed to their more widespread rule that they had. The points also increased slightly from 105 points to 110. Maybe doesn't feel quite as needed in the context of the Legion of Excess nerfs. Demonettes gained fight first, as did their attached characters. It did come at the expense of some inbuilt damage rerolls though. They used to be able to reroll ones to hit and all hit rolls against things on objectives. Now it's battle shock tests in the fight phase, which is worse. I feel like fights first maybe doesn't make them super standout in terms of their damage output. They'll likely take a few wounds off something, but probably aren't going to be outright killing that many things before they get to strike. They still keep their OC2 here as opposed to the OC1 that they got in the Emperor's Children decks. Otherwise, the Mask of Slaanesh went up slightly. The Lone Operative is now 95 points from 85. The Contorted Epitome is 100 points. That one's up from 80 and gained fights first. I guess that bit's not unhelpful. It was quite a good one to take damage from units via mortal wounds with that Legion of Excess stratagem. The Transweaver Herald Leader for the Demonettes had a datasheet rule rewrite. They no longer give the Demonettes fights first as they have it anyway. Instead, they now give them the previous Demonette buff, so reroll ones to hit and all hit rolls against things on objectives. I guess that's nice enough, but maybe has a bit of an overlap with their special rule of debuffing battle shock things. Seekers gained fights first, and then as mentioned the Seeker Chariots have just gone away in general. The Seeker 1 and the Hellflayer were maybe a little bit more nuisance units that were somewhat durable, somewhat fast, and could kill some light infantry. The character version of the unit was maybe the more interesting one, with the possibility for some big buffs, and was quite good for holding some enhancements like the Legion of Excess ones. I'm sure they'll be missed by some, particularly those who had the models. Finally, for big data sheet rewrites, there's Be'lakor's one. He went up to 375 points from 325. They did get some stat line improvements with that. His durability took a big boost with a 3+ armor save, toughness 11 and 20 wounds. Between the lot, that does seem like he is significantly harder to take down, though whether or not that's 50 points tougher, I don't know. His damage output now has 7 attacks with that big hitting profile with damage d6 plus 1. He gained devastating wounds on the strike profile rather than lethal hits, which seems like an upgrade to me. It gives him the chance to punch through invulnerable saves once in a while. And his sweep profile gains sustained hits, so that's another boost there. Finally, his choose 3 shadow form rule got an upgrade too. It still has the nice one to shield a good chunk of the army from gunlines turn 1, so things within 6 inches can't be shot outside of 18 inches. The other 2 auras did get a bit better though. Paw of Despair now is 9 inches, and while it forces battle shock tests on damaged things, now if things fail, Be'lakor gets healed, so could add a bit of insult to injury there. And the Shadow Lord one was previously a leadership thing, now it's just reroll ones to hit in a big aura for Chaos Demons in general. Not the biggest deal in the world, but I guess that will help out his own damage output if that helps more, as well as anything else that just happens to be nearby. Seems like he's more of a side grade at 375 points versus 325. He's got more dangerous and harder to kill, but maybe not by crazy amounts, but it certainly doesn't feel like a flat downgrade to me. Otherwise, the Undivided datasheets are all unchanged beyond him. The Soul Grinder's still there, and still a big chunky profile with lots of wounds and some big hitting damage stats. And then there's the 2 Demon Princes of Chaos on foot and with wings. Finally, there's the 2 detachments of the Index. I talked in a bit more detail about the Shadow Legion one in the previous video, so feel free to check that one out, which I'll link down in the video description. I'll talk through a few of the highlights here though. Basically this one doesn't need Be'lakor, but it's themed around him, and basically allows you to take half your datasheets as allied Chaos Marines from this list, most of the infantry things plus damned keyword units, no transports for the infantry though, and no big tanks or vehicles, and also obliterators don't make the list either, maybe they're under the sway of Vashtor more than Be'lakor. You also have other demon epic heroes locked out, so no taking things like Scarbrand or Shalaxi Hellbane, and you can't take any demon princes of any description either, as Be'lakor gets jealous. There's still a whole ton of units to be able to access though, loads of options between the various Chaos Space Marine things and the demons. Then for the actual core detachment rule, there's things to help out the 4 different deities in their own way. The Chaos Marines and Be'lakor themselves get Deep Strike and the Dark Pacts. Khorne gets to advance and charge. Nurgle and Tzeentch both get some nice durability buffs, debuffs to hit and wounds, and Slaanesh denies Overwatch. It feels like quite a nice tailored detachment rule. Khorne will certainly like advance and charge. Nurgle and Tzeentch definitely like being tougher. Be'lakor will enjoy Dark Pacts, and the Heretic Astartes also gain Deep Strike as well. For stratagems, there's 6 options. Maybe my 2 favourite ones are these ones. Binding Shadow for returning to reserves for up to 1 Legion's Demonica and 1 Heretic Astartes units. Nice to be able to hop on or off the board at will and strike where needed. Pretty helpful to have things in the bag to do secondary objectives too. Otherwise I quite like the direct melee damage dealer with the Channeled Wrath. This one gives you lance melee to punch up against tough stuff. Khorne gets extra AP as well. Could be nice enough for a Chaos Lord with some Legionaries or Bloodletters or Blood Crushers. Finally for enhancements, my favourite 2 out of these ones are Leaping Shadows for 15 points. Models in the Bearers unit get Scout, so you could scout a Bloodthirster forward, or a big unit of Blood Crushers or Bloodletters potentially, or even have a Great Unclean one march into the midboard. Seems nice for how cheap it is. Then Fade to Darkness is 15 points. This one's a really interesting one where you can basically wipe things out to return to reserve. So you could have a big scary squad with some Chaos Lord and Chosen, charge something, destroy it, and then return to reserves, and then potentially come back in the enemy's turn with rapid ingress, all ready to do it again to something significant. You definitely need to make sure that you're going after targets that you could reliably kill. But this could be a really powerful way to just pick the enemy army apart piecemeal in a similar sort of way to Warp Talons, but doing it on units with more significant damage output. Overall, at first impressions, feels like a pretty strong detachment to me. Certainly going to be a good rival to the Daemon Incursion, and it's quite nice to have stratagems and detachment abilities tailored to the 4 deities. Finally, there's still the Daemon Incursion detachment here, which I think is still looking very strong. Close Deep Strike via Warp Rifts mean that melee things can get to melee where they want to, and they still have that kind of crazy boosted stratagem for 1 CP for a 6-inch deep strike and charge. I feel like it might have been hit a little bit by things like bloodletters not having quite as much carnage that they cause for the points now, though flamers feel like quite a good unit that make use of the deep strike shenanigans. I guess the Great Unclean one is going to be a bit pricier for the sheer amount of durability that he can have, though I guess he has gained toughness 13 into the boots. Otherwise they've got stratagems for return to reserves, sticky objectives that can push out an aura of the Shadow of Chaos, extra AP on your attacks in general, and advance and charge in the shadow. The enhancements are generally worth it as well, as you always get the boosted version due to greater demons having an aura of Shadow of Chaos. Will be interesting to see what emerges as the strongest Chaos Demon detachment now that the Legion of Excess has been reined in a bit. I feel like a fair few people might re-embrace the Demon Incursion, though I feel like there'll certainly be a lot of hype around Bellacor's detachment too. In any case, certainly looks like a pretty major shake-up for the Chaos Demons, and maybe a little bit unsettling that it looks like there's still a bit more to come. I really do feel like it would be helpful if Games Workshop just was a bit more clear as to exactly how they're going to support Chaos Demons and for how long, just to stop people guessing. Certainly a shame to lose a couple of units. Karanak was kind of fun, and him going away maybe makes me a bit more worried for a few of the other units that are a similar sort of lesser character status as him. And shame about the Seeker Chariots as well. There might be one that a bunch of demon players might have in multiples. Otherwise, for the datasheet changes, most of the unit changes feel more like side grades than upgrades. Perhaps for some of the biggest winners, I feel like the Beasts of Nurgle did rather well, gaining Scout and OC3 and not paying any more points for it on an already fairly good datasheet. Nurgling's down at 35 points, I still think is absolutely fine, even if their debuff rule got worse. Flamers of Tzeentch just dropping down 10 points unexpectedly I think will make them into a much more interesting unit again, and Fleshhounds returning to reserve and bouncing on and off the table to do secondary objectives feels like a win for them as well for Khorne. I guess we'll probably find out more as to what they might do with Chaos Demons in the net balance update, which will be the summer one. I'd guess that the Deity Codexes will be out by then, so it might give us a bit more chance of finding the final form of Chaos for 10th edition. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below in any case, and let me know if I've made any errors or omissions here. I feel like there'll probably be a few with so many changes. I'll aim to update a pinned comment if I've missed anything significant. As mentioned earlier, a big thank you to Weyland Yutani Terrain for sponsoring the video. If you're looking for a competitive 40k terrain set, then feel free to check out their site. There'll be links down in the video description. They ship out from the EU, and there's a code Auspex5 for 5% off. I'll leave this one there for now though. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'll certainly look forward to catching up in other videos. I do tend to post new Warhammer 40k news and updates each day, and there'll certainly be plenty more like this on the channel. Check out the Patreon page and the affiliate discount links down in the video description if you'd like to help support, and a massive thank you to anyone doing so. But in any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.